Tonight's debate is on Are We Getting It Right? The State of Women and Gender Studies. It's part of the Cicero's Podium debate series on great issues, which is sponsored by the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. It's a series that's been going on now for about 3 years, and it seeks to promote genuine intellectual diversity, encourage the rising generation to think about the books, thoughts, and ideas that help shape our experience in ordered liberty. Tonight's debate is, as I said, a part of a series. And if you're interested in viewing more of these debates, and we do virtually 2 or 3 debates a month on campuses all across the country, they're all available online at isi.org if you'd like to download them and look at them on your own time. Well, to pull off an event like this, you need a lot of help on the ground, and we've certainly had it for this debate, and that shows in the strength of our co-sponsors. And we're honored tonight to have this following list of co-sponsors for our debate: the Network of Enlightened Women, Feminism is for Everyone, the Virginia Advocate, the UVA College Republicans, the Jefferson Literary Debating Society, and the Washington Literary Society and Debating Union. Let's give our co-sponsors a round of applause. Tonight's debate is going to follow a modified intercollegiate debate format. It'll be about 90 minutes long. That's including your questions and answers. And we're going to stay pretty close to the time, so I would ask you to hold your applause to the end of the debate if you can. Each participant will have a series of opening statements, engage in a series of rebuttals, ask each other a question, and then we'll have a closing statement. At this time, though, I would like to turn the podium over to representatives from both the Network of Enlightened Women and Feminism is for Everyone to introduce tonight's speaker. Our first person to introduce Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse is Krista Biker of New. Thank you.
Hi, thank you all for coming. I'm so pleased to see you here. Again, I'm Krista Biker, president of the Network of Enlightened Women and a campus representative for the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. New initiated this debate in honor of Women's History Month to foster sincere intellectual diversity at this university. I sincerely appreciate the efforts of all the clubs who share the same commitment to diversity and decided to co-sponsor this debate with us. I would like also to thank Ms. Richards for coming to UVA engaging in the topic of women and gender studies. That said, I am proud and pleased to introduce to you Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse. An economist by trade, Dr. Morse spent 15 years teaching at Yale University and George Mason University. In 1991, she and her husband adopted a boy from Romania, and the same year she gave birth to her daughter. In 1996, she left academia to mother her 2 children full-time. Since then, she has launched a successful and vibrant career as a pro-family activist, speaker, and an author. Based in California, she is a research fellow with the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty. Her books include Love and Economics, Why Laissez-Faire Family Doesn't Work, Smart Sex, Finding Lifelong Love in the Hookup World, Myths of the Sexual Revolution, Why Recreational Sex is No Fun, and What Straight Divorce Has to Do with Gay Marriage. Additionally, Dr. Morse and her husband did foster care from 2003 until August 2006. Truly, we are privileged to have her tonight. Please give a warm Virginia welcome to Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse.
We now have Kim Monserrati from Feminism is for Everyone to introduce your Richards.
Thank you. For many of us in Fife, feminism is for everyone. The idea that feminism continues on today is really important. This third wave idea of many feminisms and everyone, thus our name, Feminism is for Everyone, having an opportunity to call themselves feminists or to help out the feminist community or the goals of the feminist community. For many of us, we have taken SWAG classes, and the study of women and gender is really important to us. So when we got the opportunity to discuss this, we took the chance. And we are so thrilled to have someone many of us have studied here tonight, Amy Richards. After graduating from Barnard College, Amy organized Freedom Summer 1992, a cross-country voter registration drive. She then went on to co-found the Third Wave Foundation, a national organization for feminist activists ages 15 to 30. At the Third Wave Foundation, Amy initiated projects such as I Spy Sexism and Why Vote, as well as Why Give. She's the co-author of Manifesta, Young Women, Feminism, and the Future, as well as Grassroots, a field guide for feminist activism with Jennifer Baumgartner. An author and activist, Amy was profiled in Miss Magazine's 21 for the 21st, Leaders for the Next Century, and was named by the American Association of University Women as a 2004 Woman of Distinction. She is currently involved with the Third Wave Foundation, Miss Magazine, Choice USA, the Sadie Nash Leadership Program, Feminist.com, and Planned Parenthood of New York City. Recently, she's working on a book about feminism and motherhood entitled Opting In. Fife is happy to have Amy Richards here, and we hope that all of you enjoy the debate and enjoy learning more about studies in women and gender. Thanks.
For the short person. I just want to begin by echoing all the thanks for the co-sponsors, and it's funny because I'm technically the affirmative argument for this evening, but as I understand it, the genesis of this evening was actually an introduction from New, and so it's kind of an awkward, because I feel like it was your invitation, and so I'm actually responding to that. But thank you for Fife and for New and for all of the other organizations for having me here tonight. Although I should preface it by saying that I haven't actually debated, and since I was a freshman at Barnard, and we called them freshmen then, not first year, and I was in St. Anthony's Hall, and I debated whether Marcel Duchamp's The Urinal was art or not, which I think is a tireless debate, and but was happy to participate in it then. And it's great to be back at UVA. When my first book, Manifesta, came out, a visit to UVA was the very first event that I did for it, and so it has a very special place for me, so it's great to be back here. And the topic is, I think, more or less the relevancy of women's studies. And I want to kind of just begin by saying, as Kim had read my bio, that I was not a women's studies major. So I think what you major in does not in any way predetermine what profession you're going to pursue in life. I was an art history major, and besides that debate in my first year in college, I'm not sure I've done much in the study of women in art, though I have done tons, I think, in the study of women's studies and political science. And I think that the question is not so much, is women's studies necessary or relevant? I think that is a microcosm of a much larger question that I think people ask, which is feminism still relevant in this day and age? And is any sensitivity toward gender inequality necessary? And I just want to put it right out there from the beginning that not only would I not have a profession if I answered no to that question, but I think that we absolutely still have a need for these things. And we have a need for them because I know that every single day I get an email from somebody who is going through divorce and who is a woman and can't get custody of her children, even though the father is abusing the children. Every day I get an email from somebody who is, maybe not the exact day, but I get an email from somebody who is struggling because in her community she's trying to raise money for women and children from Somalia or from the Sudan who want to come to this country and who can't because gender persecution is not grounds for human rights. Abuse is happening in other country, and therefore you're not allowed automatic immigration into this country based on that. And so I know, and it's because of my profession, every day I'm reinforced over and over again why we still need to have sensitivity around gender. That said, I think the larger question that I'm confronted with when I say, is women's studies relevant, is what is the purpose of an undergraduate education? And I think before I began lecturing on college campuses the way I do, I think I was much more insistent that it was about the accumulation of knowledge. And now looking at how I've made my profession and been able to make my profession, and now as I travel to so many college campuses, what I see is a successful college is one that teaches their students to think, regardless of what discipline they're learning. And in fact, if you're somebody pursuing a women's studies course and does not agree with a professor's specific slant, all the more reason for you to be in that class, because it is a time for you to explore ideas. It's a time for you to challenge what has otherwise been told to you as being the only way that there is. And it's also a time for you to really think about what you think. Before I became an art history major, I was a philosophy major, and I think we all know whether we delved into philosophy or not, but the famous Plato quote of "I think, therefore I am." And I think that that is what we are trying to instill in a lot of college students, is this being empowered and being able to think for ourselves. And within women's studies, there is certainly a bias among some professors, but that bias comes not from the discipline, it comes from the professor, and I think it comes from the students that happen to be gathered in that particular class. I know as a student, I never took women's studies. I felt very limited in certain history classes I taught, that I took, because when I was in those classes, I only realized later when I started traveling to Ghana and Cuba and Zimbabwe and China that I was very much taught what is an oversimplified white man's history. And I very much felt that I was being given a biased perspective. Similarly, when I took English classes, I can't tell you how many books by Shakespeare I read, and it wasn't until my final year of college that I read Toni Morris's Beloved. And so to me, reflecting back on it, I would say, what is not biased, or what is unbiased? Is there any unbiased department that exists on a college campus? And it was not, I don't then look back and regret my college experience, but I say it is now my time to kind of take that learning and either unlearn facts that I was told, or to relearn things that I felt like I wasn't given the opportunity to explore when I was on a college campus. And in speaking to the merits of women's studies, and not only to the benefit of getting a liberal arts education, I think that what women's studies has that I wish more departments had, I think religion has this, I think other departments have it inherent in it, is a very interdisciplinary approach to education. And I know when I've experienced women's studies classes now, kind of as somebody going back and visiting them, I'm so impressed that in a women's studies class, you get religion, you get urban planning, you get history, you get society, you get political science, you get all of these programs and academic departments that you otherwise have to kind of cobble together or not, I think, because most of us go through and learn in a very linear way and in a very isolated way. And it's only later by having conversations with friends and by reading magazines and newspapers that we learn to relate to other disciplines. And I think women's studies has that very much built into its department. The other thing that I think women's studies does so well is that it immediately, and most women's studies, and I'm not that intimate with the one on this particular campus, it immediately encourages, if not requires, practical application of the discipline that you're learning. Most of them have an activism project that goes along with it, or an internship project. And I think that ability to see while you're in college, rather than waiting until you get out of college, how your major relates to life is so crucial for anybody, and especially when you're in an undergraduate education where most people, even though we're excited about what we're learning, we're really thinking, what job am I going to get when I graduate from here? And you're given so many more opportunities to begin to see that through the lens of women's studies. And at the end of the day, I think what I think about women's studies is minor or less important than I think the number of people who are engaging in women's studies. I think the popularity of women's studies, I think the popularity of students that come to the major. In 1970, there were 0 women's studies majors, and today I think there are 775 or over 750 departments on college campuses across the country. And just that volume, that sheer volume, speaks to how people have asked for this, how professors have asked for it, how administrations have asked for it, how students have asked for it. And I guarantee that they wouldn't keep these departments alive were there not economic incentive to do so, if there were not intellectual stimulation to do so. And so I think that just the mere existence and the popularity of the departments speaks volumes more than I can offer to you today. And I think that the women's studies, I began by saying that I think it's a kind of microcosm of talking about the relevancy of feminism. And I think that we all agree, even if we're staunch supporters of women's studies, that we all see it as a short-term solution. Women's studies was not meant to exempt other departments from having to include women, but to augment something that was not otherwise present on college campuses. And sadly, looking back over the 30-plus years, or roughly 30 years, that we have had women's studies on college campuses, I'm not sure that that part of the goal has been met. I think that we have done a really good job of creating women's studies programs and nurturing them. I'm not sure that we've done a good job of creating spaces within history departments, within English departments, within philosophy departments to include the study of women, or to include, I think more appropriately for today, the study of gender. Because at its most base definition, feminism is not so much, and I see women's studies as related to this, about highlighting or liberating women. It's about liberating all of us as individuals. And so by not incorporating that more wholly into other disciplines or more comprehensively into other disciplines, I feel like not only do we do the disciplines a disservice by not owning and acknowledging that other part of what has happened, but I think that we do the students a real disservice. And yet at the end of the day, I'm kind of not surprised because on college campuses, it's still a minority of us in this country that graduate from college. And so I think that the lessons that we all are very fortunate to learn and to be able to accumulate when we're all on college campuses is great, but I think that we have to also think about who's not on college campuses. And I pretty much guarantee that if those people were given more access to college, women's studies would be more needed because it would speak to the experiences of who is being left out. And maybe if it has not been a priority, it's because women have only in the last decade really been a minority, not only in terms of numbers on campus, but in terms of thought that is happening on campuses. And to me, the state of women's studies it's a very exciting time. I do go to the National Women's Studies Association meetings every now and then, and so through that and through my own lecturing, I interact with people on college campuses and see from both the professor's perspective and also from the student's perspective what they're getting from those departments. And so when I am asked this question, I think because I went to a women's college, I'm asked another version of it, which is that is women's prioritizing women in education even relevant? And I absolutely think it is. I hope that someday it won't be necessary. I hope someday that women's studies will not be a separate discipline, but will be integrated into other forms of academia. I hope that women's colleges like Barnard can cease to exist, but I feel like in the short term of looking for inclusion and identity, it is something that we need. And we need it in the same way that we need African American studies departments, and we need it in the same way that I think we need more attention on Native American history within history departments. We need it for the same reason that we need international studies departments. We need it in the same way that we need to have more comprehensive education that speaks to all of our experiences. And with more and more of student bodies, I think that inclusivity comes more naturally to our generation because we're naturally more diverse population. And a couple years ago, I was at a panel where they were talking about, there was a series of experts talking about how different professions have kept up to speed or not in terms of integrating work and family balance into their professions. And there was somebody there from J.P. Morgan Chase and somebody there from Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania and somebody there from Catalyst, which is an organization that does research around this. And everybody agreed from their own research that academia had changed the least because it was based on very outdated notions of what it meant and who was accessing it. And we've not, in the same way that we haven't updated it's very vulnerable to say this on Jefferson's campus, in the same way that we have not updated our Constitution, I think, to kind of keep pace with current times. I think that we have not always updated academia. We have kind of added things in without re-examining how the entire structure is working or, I think, not working. And I think that it is time for us not only to raise in piecemeal the questions about different departments, but I think it's time for us to raise larger questions about what are the grounds for tenure? Why is it that it's publishing? And why is it publishing in very, I think, specific publications? Why is it not the contribution that you're making back to your community? Why is it not how accessible you are to your students? And in that same way, why is it that we maybe talk about the theory of race and gender on college campuses, but how we promote people, how we accept people, is not always reflected in that. And so I hope that this conversation today can be the beginning of us having more conversations about what it means to us. And if we have not pursued a women's studies course, perhaps engage in one and see it as a challenge or as an opportunity for you to disagree and to interpret it entirely as biased and to bring your bias to that format. And I hope hope that the professor would welcome that in the same way that I think all of the students in the class would welcome it, because it is a time to figure out who we are and what we think, and we can't do that unless we understand what other people think. And now, I think I will cede.
Thank you. Roback.
Our topic this evening is whether women's studies departments in general are getting it right. And I will argue that there's no legitimate reason why the taxpayers of Virginia should support an academic department devoted solely to the study of women and feminism. The feminist movement, I would say, is not relevant. It has not made people happy, but in fact has contributed to unnecessary and almost unbelievable conflict between men and women. So let me start. Should the taxpayers support academic departments devoted solely to women and the promotion of feminist ideology? As an academic matter, I think this is completely unnecessary. Serious scholars currently located in women's studies department can be housed in other departments such as English, psychology, anthropology, and sociology, and in fact, many of them already have joint appointments. The faculty research in the women's studies departments should be able to survive the scrutiny of other scholars in their primary disciplines. And if the research cannot withstand that scrutiny, there's certainly no reason to be supporting it within a separate department. Women students do not need special support in today's academic world. The fields in which women continue to be underrepresented are fields in which women are already being heavily recruited and courted. Many schools and companies have outreach programs specifically designed to attract more women into science and engineering, and yet despite these efforts, the fields remain stubbornly male. Besides, who among us is willing to sacrifice their own natural interests in order to win one for the girls? I spent my own academic career in economics, a male-dominated field, but I always found myself attracted to the more humanistic aspects of the discipline. I would have had to distort my own intellect and interests in order to force myself into the extreme male mold that would have been required to succeed in the more mathematical aspects of economics. I was unwilling to do that to myself. I can't, in good conscience, encourage other people to cram themselves into academic slots that don't really fit. Overall, women outnumber men among undergraduates. For undergraduates of the traditional college age, under 25, a clear female majority emerged a decade ago. The male share of undergraduates dropped from 49% to 46% over that decade. Among undergraduates over 25, women outnumber men almost 2 to 1. The largest gender gap is among African American undergraduates, where males make up a mere 40% of the 25 and under age group. This is hardly evidence of an oppressed minority who needs continual help from the establishment. In fact, the gender imbalance in higher education is now a social problem for women themselves. Educated women, particularly African American women, finding a hard time finding suitable marriage partners. There are simply not enough educated men to go around. And as a result, some educated women are giving up on marriage and choosing single motherhood with all of its accompanying problems and risks simply by default. Therefore, we do not need a women's studies department to give women students additional encouragement and support. If anything, we need a men's studies department that would ask why men are retreating from higher education. We should have a men's center on campus to encourage men to invest in themselves for their own benefit and the benefit of the wider society. There are many other interesting topics that men's studies could consider. For instance, why do men commit suicide so much more often than women? Men in general commit suicide at 4 times the rate that women do. Married men are only half as likely as bachelors and about 1/3 as likely as divorced men to take their own lives. In other words, getting married cuts a man's suicide risk in half. Getting divorced triples it. And a man whose wife dies is about 10 times more likely to kill himself than is a wife whose husband dies. Why is that? A men's studies department might also ask why children do better with single fathers than with single mothers. Even when income is held constant, children who live with their custodial fathers have higher self-esteem, less anxiety, less depression, fewer problem behaviors than children who are with their mothers full-time. Children in father custody have the advantage also of maintaining a more positive relationship with their mothers than do children in mother custody have in maintaining a positive relationship with their fathers. And while we're on the subject of divorce, scholars of men's studies might ask whether it's really true that divorced men have, quote, abandoned their families when 2/3 to 3/4 of divorces are initiated by women. And the vast majority of these divorces do not involve anything remotely like domestic violence. Students more interested in activism than in scholarship might want to fight the injustice so frequently perpetrated by divorce courts, which enforce non-custodial fathers' obligations to pay financial support much more strenuously than their rights to visit their children. Governmental agencies take a dim view of fathers who fail to pay, but these same agencies seem to be indifferent when women actively interfere with their children's rights to have relationships with their fathers. Men's studies scholars might also investigate why little boys are so much more emotionally vulnerable than little girls. For instance, a study examining the impact of maternal depression on the cognitive development of children found no effect on girls. But the boys of depressed mothers scored a full standard deviation lower on standardized intelligence tests than boys whose mothers were healthy. Developmental differences between girls and boys are so commonly found that child development experts, more or less, take them for granted. In this particular study of maternal depression, the researchers suggest, and I quote, because infant boys as a group are already developmentally delayed compared with girls, their ability to regulate their attention and emotions and find order in the world are particularly in need of help from a sensitive, healthy caregiver, close quote. And why is it that men are overrepresented in the death professions? Of the deaths that occur in the workplace, 92% occur to men. Jobs like timber cutters, fishers, pilots, navigators, roofers, cab drivers, truck drivers, construction laborers, these have the highest risks of death. And these, of course, are traditionally male-dominated occupations. In addition to a men's studies department to balance the women's studies department, we should also have a department of life studies to balance the pro-abortion ideology of women's studies programs. The interdisciplinary life studies department would prepare young women and men for careers of activism and service within the pro-life movement. Women could receive the professional training they need to run a crisis pregnancy center, or raise funds for pro-life foundations, or manage medical clinics that deliver babies free of charge. The life studies program might also have classes cross-listed in embryology to explain what that blob of tissue really is, that the product of conception is a human life from the time, not from the time of quickening, as medieval thinkers believed, and not from the time of implantation in the womb, but from the moment of conception. The life studies program could offer courses that explain what pro-life leaders actually believe, as opposed to the caricatures of their views so often presented in other classes and forums. Students might learn about Norma McCorvey, who was the original Jane Roe of Roe v. Wade, how Norma McCorvey felt exploited by her pro-abortion attorneys, why she eventually had a change of heart and converted to Catholicism. One has to admit in all candor that students are not likely to hear this kind of information in any other classes on campus. But enough about the other academic departments. What about feminism itself? Has feminism made people happy? Now, I fully realize that feminists disagree amongst themselves on many crucial issues, so I am not going to try to unravel those Byzantine threads. I'm simply going to analyze the form of feminism that is filtered down into mainstream culture. And within mainstream culture, feminism means roughly this: women and men are the same, except women are better. So my question is this: has the systematic denial of genuine gender differences made people happy? I believe, on the contrary, that this systematic denial of actual differences has been a disaster for men and women alike. Differences between the sexes appear at birth. As we mature, everything that has to do with sex or reproduction affects men and women differently. Men and women react to the sex act itself differently. Women frequently are more eager to get married and start families at an earlier age than men are. If a couple has trouble conceiving, the man and woman experience infertility very differently. If they do have a child, they react very differently to the woman's pregnancy. They treat the baby differently, and in fact, the baby treats them differently. As their child grows up, mothers and fathers have different approaches to parenting. If the couple cannot admit these most basic differences, they're headed for conflict and grief. They'll expect the other person to feel what they feel, see things as they see them, and then feel cheated when they don't. The demand for equal sharing of household chores runs afoul of the same problem. Men and women are sensitive to different needs within the household. This is why sociologists have so often found that gender equality ideology is correlated with marital dissatisfaction among wives, and some of that research has actually been done here at the University of Virginia. Women who cling to feminist ideology continually feel cheated. By contrast, wives who feel appreciated by their husbands for their contributions report higher levels of marital satisfaction. And this is true even among women who do the lion's share of the housework. Recent findings even suggest that women are happiest when they feel that their husbands are emotionally engaged with them, regardless of the division of household chores. The feminist attempt to overlook or explain away systematic differences between men and women has made people miserable. Feminism has taken the personal relationship that's the most important to most people, namely marriage, and injected poison into it. As the relationship between mothers and fathers, marriage is also the most basic unit of social cooperation. When marriage breaks down, the substitutes for marriage are crude, ineffective, and actually very intrusive. No university needs a department devoted solely to the study of women and the promotion of this socially destructive ideology. The intellectual life of the university will go along just fine without a women's studies department. The taxpayers should stop paying for the promotion of feminism. Thank you very much.
As someone who makes my living as a feminist and who uses that term, unfortunately on a daily basis many times, I want to begin by giving how the majority people, including the dictionary, define feminism, which is that feminism is the movement for the full social, political, and economic equality of all people. And I personally add to that that feminism is about each person having enough access to information to make informed choices about their lives. And I think that it is an interesting question to say, do we need a men's studies department, or to back that up even further and to say, why are men retreating from college? And I would argue that men are retreating from college because they can get the same paid jobs with a high school education, especially if they're a white man, that they can that a white woman can get graduating from college. And so it is less necessary for men to have a college education in the same way that it is for all women and for non-white people in general. And I think that that is an interesting question, because I know that on some campuses the population of women has crept up to about 60%, and it has caused alarm, saying, what does this mean for the academy? And I think if we look at the real trendsetters, if we look at Harvard, and if we look at Princeton, if we look at Yale, and we look at Cornell, and if we probably look at UVA, although I'm not certain, and if you look at the more elite institutions, it's actually more likely to be 44% women. It's still dominated by men on those campuses. And those institutions, I would say, are giving even more access to their graduates and more opportunity. And I think that the question that was raised of I didn't realize men had it so bad, but of what the pressure, I guess, that is put onto men's life is men do, unfortunately, die on average of 8 years longer than women. But the real reason is because of the added stress they have on their lives, because of having to financially support a family and to repress an emotional life. And feminism is, in as much as it is giving women the opportunity to have their own identity and make money, it is trying to free women and free men up from that early death. It is trying to say, let me share the economic responsibilities of this household and let you share the emotional responsibilities of this household. And so feminism in that way is very much about making sure that each of us are contributing equally to the household. And I think in that way, it is a guarantee of having a healthy marriage. And I have reams of statistics. In fact, the studies I read say that if you're in a more egalitarian marriage, you're actually likely to have better sex because you're not bitter at your husband for not doing anything around the house. And there are lots of studies about custody, that the reason more men don't have custody is that they don't ask for custody. And when men do ask for custody, they're actually more likely to get it, revealing that there is a society that is more biased toward men in more responsible because they can, or reducing the family to economics. They're more likely to be able to support their child. And so I do want to engage the question about what is men's responsibility in this. And I don't know of any women's studies class that I've been to, because I never went to the one at Boston College that actually excludes men, and I've never been to one that did not include men. And the men that are taking these classes, I think, are venturing to women's studies for the same reason that women do. They're getting a version of human history or human studies, which is missing from other disciplines. And so whether you call it women's studies or gender studies or men's studies, I think that the motivation is the same. It's to find a place where you can feel that your experiences are confirmed and that you are not bad for being gay, or that you are not bad for having your parents be divorced, or that you are not awful because you're not white. It is a confirmation of who you are and what potential you have. And that is what I see as the hope of women's studies.
First of all, just a few facts about women's earnings. The fact is that the relative wages of high school educated men have been dropping over the last 30 years. The relative wages of men in general have been dropping over the last 30 years. And if you compare apples for apples, there are many, many professions in which women actually get more. Women of comparable education, taking comparable risks, women actually are better paid in many professions than are men. And particularly if you look at the issue of marriage, marriage is obviously a key issue. And it works like this, that never married women earn roughly the same, and in some cases more, than never married men. What happens is that when people get married, men tend to work harder and get paid more, that they get paid more than anybody. Married men get paid more than single men. And married women tend to drop out of the labor force, and so for that period of time, their earnings are lower. And so you've got a number of things which are going on at the same time. But if you look at people of comparable education, the claim that was made here is simply not true, that men are dropping out because they don't need the college education. I don't really think that's what's going on. I think that what's happening is that men are not maturing as fast. Demands are not being made on them. Men have the idea they're not needed within the household. They have the idea that they are not needed within the home, and that basically in many sectors of society, men have been reduced to being a combination wallet and sperm bank. And they don't feel that they're empowered. They don't feel that they're part of the household. Now, as far as marriage and as far as custody is concerned, there, I think, is a consistent bias towards mother custody. The trend, as far as I can see a trend, is that there is coming to be a trend towards shared custody or joint custody, precisely because people have come to see that father absence is a major cost in the lives of children. And so that is the trend. It doesn't have to do with men saying, if a man raises his hand and says, I want my kids, he automatically gets his kids. There are many, many cases where fathers have been excluded from their children's lives because of divorce settlements of one kind or another, where her obligations to allow him access to the kids and visit with them, where that is being interfered with, and he has very little in the way of recourse. And by the way, I should mention, just as something that everyone should think about, whatever your ideology might be on gender or wherever you fit in the left-right dichotomy, you should be aware that the one institution in this society that perpetrates the most egregious invasions of personal privacy is the family court system. People who are subject to the family court have the courts telling them how much money they have to spend on their kids, whether they can move and relocate, how much time they get to spend with their children. Divorced fathers have been told whether or not they're allowed to go to a Little League game, which is a public event, and because if they show up, then they're getting more time than they're supposed to be getting. Those things of that level of detail are being regulated by the family courts. These are agents of the state making decisions based often on very little information. In a 45-minute court hearing, they'll come up with these decisions about what you can and cannot do. Some divorce decrees go so far as to specify which parent gets to have the child on Christmas Day with the exact time that they have to turn the child over to the other parent. This is an outrageous invasion of personal privacy, and I would argue that it has come about because marriage has broken down. That parental cooperation is breaking down, and the substitute for parental cooperation is really very crude and not very satisfactory to anyone. So that's the main point on the divorce question, or certainly something that everybody should be thinking about. That this is a substitute institution that is really so crude and not really doing the job here. And then finally, I would just like to make a comment. I think there's something to what Amy says about men being stressed by the responsibilities that they have, but there is also evidence to suggest that when a woman earns more than her husband, the marriage is stressed, and also the man's lifespan drops. It doesn't increase, as you might think if it was simply stress. But the man is more likely to die early if his wife earns more money. So there's many things going on here which have to do with a person's sense of themselves and their ability to cooperate with each other versus using money within the relationship as kind of a power game and a power bargaining chip. And I think that we probably all agree that cooperation within marriage is everybody's objective.
On average, and I think it's very hard to speak on averages or in averages, women and men earn 97%, or women earn 7% of what men earn in the workforce, except when you remove the time that women take away from the workforce to take care of their children, because most workplaces don't provide paid leave, and therefore women take leave to take care of their children, which I think people are arguing is women's sole responsibility, and I think which society pretty much dictates is women's responsibility. I don't necessarily believe that, but I do agree that if women are taking time away from the workplace to take care of their children, which is something that society values, the rearing of children, they should not be penalized economically for doing so. And so if we are going to look at statistics, then if to get to that place of equality, then women have to simply stop reproducing, because the only place to get to 100% of economic equality is if women stop doing that. And I don't think any of us want to see that happen. And when you do look at more national statistics and averages, it's more like 76%. And then when you break it down on race, and then when you break it down by academic achievement, it goes down and down and down. And I do think it's a pertinent question to the extent that undergraduate education is meant to position us to be able to go out into the world and to compete on more equal footing, men and women. And I think in that way it's a valid question. I think the larger thing that is being raised for me is that there seems to be this premise that the point of an undergraduate education is not how we are going to achieve ourselves or achieve in a more business world or even in a social way, but how we are going to achieve as women in terms of who we marry and how we raise our kids. And I would hope that the University of Virginia has higher standards for its female students than just how well they mother and just who they marry. And I think, and I would, even though you're a state school, and those of you who live in state, it's slightly less, I would hope that your parents who are paying your education, or if you're paying it on your own, or if there are federal grants paying for you to be here, that you have more incentive than to spend all of this money, because a dating service is a lot cheaper than going to a higher education. And I think that one of the main differences, as I'm seeing it, between the two of us is how much we value all of you as individuals. I'm going to take as an assumption that most of us, not most of us, at least half of us come from divorced families. I'm going to take it as a given that most of us in this room had 2 working parents. And I'm going to take it as a given that most of these men are not suicidal. I'm going to take it as a given that most of us have ambitions and have confidence and have a belief that we are able of accomplishing things in life. And so I might not think that women's studies is the sole way to that route, but I do believe that as individuals, the reason we come to institutions like UVA is because we learn from our peers. We learned that, oh, I had divorced parents and I'm not an evil person. Oh, my mother got divorced and she actually went on to make more money and have a much happier life in her second marriage. And I think that that is the importance precisely of undergraduates, to learn that we're not living in isolation and that our experience are confirmed by not assuming that there is one way for all of us to live.
Well, I am indeed relieved to know that we're not all here just to get an MRS degree. I don't know anybody who thinks we are. I'm not quite sure where that came from, but I think there are some social trends that we should talk about here that I think feminism has some complicity in and that we haven't quite mentioned yet. And that is that women are, in fact, having an increasingly difficult time getting married and staying married. It's my observation that most people, and I talk about marriage and divorce all the time, it's my observation most people would like to get married and stay married. Most people have that as one important life goal, especially people whose parents have been married. They know that it's not an enjoyable experience, and you'd like to be able to get married and have it work. And so one of the trends that I am seeing is that many women put lots and lots of attention and effort and energy into their educations and into their careers, and they succeed. They do very well. They're very focused. Women do well academically. I think this has been proven to everyone's satisfaction that women can make it in academic life and professional life and everything else. And nothing further needs to be proven on that score. But what has happened is that those very, very focused women often end up in their 30s unmarried and disappointed because they start to feel that they would like to be married, they would like to have children, and they're having more and more trouble finding somebody suitable and indeed figuring out how to spend their time in such a way that they could go about achieving that objective. And so as far as I'm concerned, we need to be honest about the fact that the life patterns of women and men should be different in important ways in order to be respectful to the unique needs that each of us has. The fact of the matter is our years of peak fertility are in our 20s and early 30s. That's the best time to have kids. If that's an important objective for you, you need to get on with it at that particular time. But on the other hand, the career path that all of us are on are career paths that have been generated by men and their needs, in effect, that you hop right on to the career ladder as soon as you get out of college, and you just go for it right then. Well, by the time you've made partner or gotten tenure or any of those sort of important career objectives, your years of peak fertility are behind you. And this has created a lot of very serious disappointment among women once they get into their 30s and even 40s. And that's why you're seeing people, headed for the infertility clinics and, trying to, and maybe in some cases choosing single motherhood, even though they would themselves have preferred to be able to do that with a partner. So I think there's a whole set of things that has been put into motion because we've been trying to do it the way the guys do it, and that's not necessarily the most suitable way for us to do it. And the fact that we live longer is something we can use to our advantage. That means we get 8 years longer at the end, where we can be doing other things after our kids have grown up and gone. We can be very active in the workforce and so forth after the kids have gone and still have, you can be at home and raise your kids and all that and still have plenty of time to do other things. So I think it's a mistake to say that what equality means is that we have to go about get the same goals in the same way at the same time. I think that's a mistake. And I think there's much too much emphasis and pressure on people to perform in that way and up to those kinds of standards. And what Amy said, I'm glad to hear that she acknowledged that when you have taken into account the marriage factor, the fact is that women are earning 97% of what men earn. And it's not the case that in all professions the numbers start to go down. That's really not the case. There are some professions in which there's an actual premium on women. There's a premium on women who have engineering training and a whole variety of other things. We could go through the different numbers and look at that. But that's, I think, not really anybody's point. I think the main point everybody is concerned about is whether people can create a life plan for themselves that is satisfying, that works for them, and that over the whole course of the lifetime works out. But the other thing we haven't mentioned is the stability of marriage, which is an extremely important point, Because in order to have a sort of a lifelong plan that I'm going to have my kids now and I'm going to go back into the workplace later, you need to feel some confidence that your married life is going to hold together so that you can take turns being dominant in the workplace and taking time at home. And that's something that you can do if you have lifelong marriage, but which is a lot harder to do if you have in the back of your mind that maybe my husband will leave me. Maybe today's the day that he's going to take advantage of that no-fault divorce option and walk out. And so that instability or fear of instability within the marriage relationship is another factor that has to be put into the mix in the overall quality of women's lives.
And I felt like it was more important to save time for you all to ask questions, and so without seeming disagreeable, I actually want to cede my 5-minute time and save more time for the Q&A at the end.
Okay, so I talk for 5 minutes, then Amy talks for 5 minutes? Okay, that's cool. Okay. All right, I want to close in this way with sort of a personal statement. In 1991, I was a tenured professor of economics at George Mason, and I received a phone call from a dear friend of mine, Jonathan Hughes, who is one of the great men of economic history. He'd received our adoption announcement, announcing the arrival of our 2.5-year-old son from Romania, and he had also heard through the grapevine that I was pregnant. And as I knew, my friend John Hughes had terminal cancer. So he called me up to congratulate me on our new arrival and to coo over the photo that I had sent him. And then he said to me, "When you get to be my age, you realize that being a parent was the one thing in life that was really worth doing." Now, mind you, Jonathan Hughes had a distinguished teaching and publishing career. But that's how he saw his own life from his deathbed. He went on to say, "Enjoy your kids while they're young. The university will still be there after they've grown up." Now, I wanted to take his advice, but I was afraid to quit my job. I'll never get another tenured position. That's what I told myself. And yet the tug, the pull of those children was unmistakable. And our son had genuine needs. He'd had plenty of institutional care in his orphanage in Romania. What he needed was a mommy. That would be me. So my husband had moved to the D.C. area for the sake of my teaching job at George Mason. He is a nuts and bolts engineer, and there was really nothing for him in Washington, D.C. If you know anything about D.C., you know it's all social engineering and no real engineering. Now, he had worked with the same contracting firm there for 10 years, and by 1996, he really wanted to leave and move to California to join a laser company and get in on the high-tech boom, which turned out to be a high-tech roller coaster, but we didn't know that then. Well, I was finally ready to let it go. I took the leap of faith and went with my husband. When we left the D.C. area, I didn't have another job lined up. I made a decision that the family would be my first priority, and I would fit my work in around the edges of that full-time job of being a mother. As it happened, part-time research and writing positions fell into my lap, and I had all the work that I really wanted. During those years, our family had any number of problems to deal with. Death and dying, mental illness, physical illness, all came into our immediate world. The fact that I had made myself available to my children meant that we had some slack in the family system to deal with those problems as they arose. As a bonus, I got the opportunity to do many other wonderful things that I didn't really have time for when I was working full-time. I could actually plan vacations and outings for our family. I could help at the kids' schools, bring casseroles to sick friends. I got to have friends, dear women friends, really for the first time since high school. And we were foster parents for 3 years, to a total of 8 children. And you know what? Jonathan Hughes was right. The university is still here. Here I am. I'm back. And university life hasn't really changed all that much. It's almost as if I never left. The women's movement needs to abandon its old, tired, leftist, and radical roots. We need a new women's movement. We're living long enough that we can have it all, just not all at once. Young women today feel they must build their careers before they can start their families. But if we do that, our peak fertility years are behind us. Many of us miss the chance of marriage and family altogether. The new women's movement would ask employers and universities to accommodate us when we return to the public sphere after decades of nurturing the private sphere. The new women's movement could seek career paths designed to work for us instead of trying to compete on career paths designed for men's needs as husbands and fathers. The new women's movement could be based on respect for and appreciation of the distinct strengths that men and women bring to a marriage. Instead of demanding equality between the inherently unequal, we could set a higher standard for cooperation and complementarity. Instead of enshrining the most extreme forms of radical individualism into marriage, we could work to make marriage more durable for the mutual benefit of the spouses, for their children, and for the wider society. This is my vision for what the women's movement should have been and could yet become. Thank you very much.
I'm so glad that Dr. Morse brought it back to a personal place, because I do think that is a lot of our motivations as we go out. What was our personal history? What is our personal experience right now? And I think in many ways I have a bit of a different biography. I did not have fertility problems. I gave birth at 33 to my first son and 36 to my second son. I happened to work pretty much in a freelance way. I've never had to choose between my career and my family. I don't have full-time childcare. I get up on Wednesday mornings and I bake muffins and I take them to my kids' school, and on Thursday afternoons I'm home all the time for an organized soccer trip that I do with my son's school every Thursday afternoon, and then I come home and I stay up till 1 in the morning writing my book on motherhood. And so I think I have been lucky that I've not had to choose, and I've not ever seen my career at the expense of my family. And that's because I work in a more flexible way. And I would say the thing that I maybe sacrifice is a little bit of economic security, because I'm making it up and I pay for my own health insurance and I don't have the security net behind me. And yet that is a sacrifice I'm willing to make, because I, like Dr. Morse, believe in the time that I have with my children. I think that if there is something I want to leave you with, and maybe it's just emphasizing what I see as maybe a difference of opinions, is I don't want to blame the women for their situation. I don't think fertility is women's problem. If there is a larger fertility problem today, it's because of environmental pollutants that go unregulated. Fertility is 30%, if not more, men's problem as it is women's problem. I think also if we look at divorce, Dr. Morse said that women are more likely to be the ones to ask for divorce. They're more likely to ask for divorce because they're in miserable marriages and don't feel like they have a room to be their own person within the confines of that particular marriage. It's not that marriage is bad, it's just that that particular scenario was bad. And I think that I have a confidence that it is not individual women who are making these society unequal. I think that it is certain systemic problems that still exist, or certain societal obstacles. And I think that if we bring it back to the academy and to women's studies, I think I'm not threatened by women's studies because I see it as only aiding us and beginning to examine why some of these systems continue to exist, even if the majority of us don't always believe in them. And so I think that I'm not threatened by women's studies because I see it as only heightening who I am, making it more possible for me personally to have a family and a career. And I think also that it is important to always examine. I know one of the other debates that happens on college campuses around women's studies is around violence against women and rape. And it's not that fraternities cause rape, it's that rape happens in maybe a Greek system. And I think that that's an example of what I'm saying is raised within women's studies. It's not the individual, it's what's happening. All men aren't predisposed to be one way and all women aren't predisposed to be another way. It's looking at what our lives pose to us as unique individuals. And on that note, I just want to end you with a story I heard a couple years ago of June Jordan, who was a great poet who died a couple years ago from breast cancer. And she had been a very tireless civil rights activist. And she one day was riding in her car and listening to Dr. Martin Luther King on the radio. And he said something that she didn't agree with. And she said, in hindsight, that it was the moment where she really came into her own and became a civil rights activist, rather than following the lead of somebody else, where she actually owned it for herself. And I think that that is precisely what these moments present for you. It's not to agree or disagree. It's for you to sit and reflect and have conversations with your friends and conversations with your family and say, what do I uniquely believe and what is going to be the best scenario for me? Thank you.
If men have had all these accomplishments that get spoken of, well, that's only because they've been oppressing women and keeping women from having the same accomplishments. So I would ask you whether you think anything ought to be around so that those who have had only that exposure can be introduced to ideas that challenge that. And moreover, whether you would really ask that people coming in for their first course directly dealing with gender, focused on gender, who haven't done a lot of outside reading, but who feel something may be pulling them towards a more traditional perspective, whether such people should be asked to take on the professor and the majority of students in the room just based on that vague tug towards something more traditional.
First of all, I want to know where you were raised, and I think that there are tons of, I'm assuming you've heard of the Washington Times and the Weekly Standard and even the New York Times. I think there is plenty of discourse out there that is presenting a embodiment of masculinity, if that's what you were asking, what you were saying you were looking for. I think that those sources exist out there. In terms of how to go into a women's studies or a gender studies class, as far as I know, on this campus, and I've not seen on other campuses, gender studies is never mandated. So if you're going into that class, you have some interest in being there. And even if it is fulfilling some diversity requirement, you're still making a selection of that course from a range of other courses. And so if you're in that classroom, I would ask the question back to you of what drew you to that classroom. And I think the most important thing you can do in a women's studies class is to go in and listen in the beginning, because I know from hearing from students, I'm always shocked when people find themselves in a women's studies course when they say this to me, but they ultimately say, oh, I thought that feminism was only about X, Y, or Z. And then I took this women's studies class and I realized it was about
than you're actually stating here, I would guess. I mean, I don't know if you're saying that the New York Times isn't feminist enough for you. I'm not sure what you want them to say that they don't already say. But I would just take the Harvey Mansfield book as an example. I mean, when Harvey Mansfield goes around and talks like that on campus, he has a reaction. Either it's a completely new thought for people that manliness is something positive and constructive that men should aspire themselves to, or he gets treated with derision by his colleagues
You described a very beautiful vision. However, it seems like it disagrees with your personal history, and I'm wondering how to realize it in the real world. My mother took some time off to take care of me and my sister, and it's hard for her to get a job. It's hard for her to get back in her career. It's a real struggle for women in their 40s and 50s to get back where they were before they took time off. And I just want to ask you how to make it happen.
I totally agree with that, and I think we would all be better off if the women's movement would take that problem as its central focus, rather than equalizing career paths when you first get out of college. Much of the regulation, certainly much of the litigation, and legislation has been focused on trying to make it so a 30-year-old woman looks like women's issues are marginalized on college campuses. I just don't think that's. Let me ask you this. Would you support, you personally, let's forget campus politics, you personally, would you support Harvey Mansfield's class on manliness being included in a gender studies program? Yes. Would you support a book called Taking Sex Differences Seriously as being a legitimate course in a gender studies department? Yes. Thank you. Perhaps you could talk to some of the people here.
I cannot take that question because I actually am a mother of a 1-year-old and I have only had babysitters for a certain amount of time, so unfortunately I cannot answer your question.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Before we continue, there is a final announcement, but I hope that you were encouraged by tonight's debate. We realize this is a very unique forum. The Intercollegiate Studies Institute is the only national organization that is bringing civil debate by such wonderful participants to campuses all across the country. And if you're interested in debating, you should look at our website to see debates on the Iraq War, on abortion, on capital punishment, on legalization of drugs, on all sorts of perennial as well as current topics at ISI.org. Before we end tonight, though, I'm going to introduce Ms. Sarah Tisdale, the Jefferson Debating Society here at the University of Virginia, who has 2 announcements for us. Okay.
Thank you. Good evening. It's great to see such a wonderful turnout to this debate. My name, again, is Sarah Tisdale, and I think my official capacity at this debate is to be Vanna White and present the winner of the iPod. But I'm also the representative for the Jefferson Literary and Debating Society, which is one of the co-sponsors for this event. And on behalf of the Jefferson Society, I just want to thank Dr. Morse and Ms. Richards and the Cicero's Podium series for sponsoring this debate. The Jefferson Society is the oldest continually existing collegiate debating organization in the United States, and we are always striving to provide an intellectual forum for debate and discussion, both to the university and the wider community. And so we were very proud to be able to participate in this debate when Ms. Spiker came and broached the idea. The natural and obvious choice was to say yes, so I want to thank her again for soliciting our co-sponsorship. And I also want to invite everyone who's here tonight to a follow-up discussion being held in Kaleidoscope Lounge tomorrow night at 7:30. We unfortunately, due to time reasons, we can't answer all your questions here, but if you come to this forum, we're going to be having members of New and Fife and the Jefferson Society just talk further about the issues that have been raised in this debate. I think we've been giving out flyers too, so you can hand them to your friends, and just remember that as an option for tomorrow night. And without further ado, I actually get to pick. I didn't know this. All right. The winner of the iPod is, it's a number. All right. Is 610760.